it'll be a good place to try to get unstuck. So I'm going to work through the functionality I've listed out one by one. That way we can keep track of what's going on and make sure that we achieve all of the requirements of this project. So the first one is program asks the user to type the first number. So that is going to be an input of some sort, and we're going to say, what is the first number? And then we add a colon, add a space so that they can type it in, and we'll save this to a variable called num1. Now next, the program is going to ask the user to type a mathematical operator. So plus, minus, multiply or divide. So now that's going to be another input, and this is going to be pick an operation. And then we're going to put a space. And now we're going to save this inside a variable, which I'll call operation symbol. Now, how does a user know what to type? How do they know that they need to type one of these symbols? Well, if we look at the demo, you can see that we actually list out all 4 of the operators for them, and that way they'll know which symbol to use. So how can we do that? Well, we could use our existing dictionary called operations to give them an idea of what to type. So we could, for example, use what we've learnt about looping through dictionaries. For symbol in operations, and then for each of the symbols, we know that when we loop through dictionaries, it just gives us the key as the binding to the first variable. So then we can simply just print out the symbol. So let's run this file as it is and see our first input trigger. And then we've got each of our keys in our operations dictionary being printed out. And finally, we get to the input where it asks us for the operation symbol. So now we're ready to tackle this sentence, which is program asks the user to type the second number. So let's go ahead and save this to a variable called num2. And it's again going to be an input, which is going to say, what is the next number? And then remember that with numbers, such as num1 and num2, we need to actually use it as a number in order for our mathematical operations to work. Because at the moment, if we try to do, for example, num1 plus num2, it's going to treat them as strings. So if I try to add 3 to 3, it's going to give me 33 instead of 6. And so in order for that to not happen, we need to turn these numbers into either integers or into floats. Now, because we've got division, so I'm going to wrap the input for num1 and num2 both inside floats. And now we're ready to tackle the next part, which is where the program is going to work out the result based on the chosen mathematical operator, and obviously work it out based on num1 and num2. So that is where the part comes in that we prepped for. We know that we can get hold of the name of these functions by tapping into the relevant key. And notice that we printed out each of these keys for the user so that they would pick it for their operation symbol. So that means we can use this operation symbol as the key selector to pick out the correct operation. And that's why we went through this whole process of setting up the dictionary and setting up the methods. So here, if we go ahead and simply just print the operations, which is our dictionary, and then using the square brackets, passing in the operation symbol as the key, you'll see that if I type plus, and it doesn't really matter which number, you'll see the function that gets picked will be add. But if I pick a different operation, say this one, then the function that gets selected will be multiply. And all we need to do to activate it is to add the parentheses, and then the two numbers that we're going to pass into any of these functions will be n1 and n2. So let's pass num1 for n1 and num2 for n2, so that these user generated numbers gets placed into whichever function they desired, and then it will output the result of that calculation. So let's run this code and try something like, again, 3 plus 3, and now we get 6, which is a lot better than before. Now notice that in the demo, when we do the same thing, it gives us the whole calculation, which I think is quite nice because then the user sees the entire equation. So let's replicate that in our code as well. So instead of just printing the result, let's go ahead and create a f string and place this calculation inside a set of parentheses. Alternatively, you can place it inside a separate variable if you think this makes it easier to understand and easier to read, and then we can simply place the answer into the f string. So our equation is going to be num1 and then space, and then the operation symbol, and then space, and then num2, and then finally equals, and we get to the answer. So let's try this again.